Hello bag builders, it's Diane from Spencer Ogg Sewing Patterns, just popping on to introduce you to my new sewing pattern and video tutorial. This is the Amplector, the bag that gives you a hug. It's a full written pattern with in-depth colour photos, full-size pattern pieces for 2 sizes and complete video sew-along. This versatile bag comes in 2 sizes with 4 different strap variations, so it's 8 patterns in one. The inspiration came as I was designing the Bummety Bum bag tutorial. I was kind of experimenting with making it into a crossbody, and it made me wonder why we have both straps coming from the top on a crossbody bag. Surely it'd be more comfortable to have a hybrid design where you have one coming from the top but the other attached at the side. And voila, the Amplector was conceived, and it works a treat. Amplector is Latin for hug or embrace, and that's exactly what this bag does. It hugs the body in a smooth silhouette that's both flattering and comfortable. It's suitable for confident beginners, and as with all my patterns, I always spend a lot of time engineering and considering how and where layers are building up so it can be made happily on a domestic machine. This bag has 8 different options, 2 sizes and 4 ways to make it. In addition to the L-strap option that we've talked about, I've also given full instructions for making it as a bum bag, with a regular crossbody strap, and even as a clutch, and with 2 sizes for each. Also included are full instructions for using rectangle adjusters or a side adjuster buckle. We're tending to wear our bags smaller and higher these days, and this fits the bill perfectly. The configuration of the strap means it hugs the body and moves with you, a little like a bum bag does, without the need for anything around your waist. Bum bags are really useful, but they're not very forgiving, and that's where my idea stemmed from, after seeing how popular my recent bum bag tutorial had actually been. So the small was the first size I developed, as I wanted something for myself just for nipping out with a dog, or to the local shop, or to just pop over my coat. And it kind of did the job of a bum bag, but in a more flattering way. I can easily get an XL phone, keys, Lewis wallet, mask, and maybe even a few dog bits in there. If worn high, you can do anything in it in comfort. I don't even need to take it off when doing something active, it sits so close to the body. Once I perfected the small size, I realised that it would probably work well slightly larger too, for travel, shopping, festivals, etc. And so I developed a more generous size. It's more secure for travel than a regular crossbody, as it's so much closer to your body rather than swinging against your hip. The Spencer Ogg original strap design of the Amplector ensures a lovely slim shape, made that way so it does sit close to the body, but with feature side panels to give it a 3D look. The front pocket is a great place to showcase a feature fabric, and there's an option to add a closure too. It has a large zip compartment, and inside is a generous slip pocket. The bag magically turns through this at the end, so there's no hand stitching or binding required anywhere. I've used chunky 1.5 inch cotton webbing as I like the chunky strap look, but you can use any width of webbing you want to. It's suitable for most medium weight fabrics, including canvas, home deck weights, waterproof canvas, cork, vinyl, oilskin, denim. I'm actually loving the waterproof canvas look for a real outdoorsy type bag. It also works great for men in wax canvas, oilskin and vinyls. It's a lovely, easy make, and you need less than half a yard of fabric to make it. It comes together really quickly, whichever size or strap option you choose. The finished size for the small is 23 by 15 centimetres, that's 9.25 by 6 inches. The large is 28.5 by 20 centimetres, and that's 11.25 by 8 inches. Have a look at some of these amazing bags my testers made using the pattern. The different looks are endless, they're such a talented lot. The pattern is available for purchase now on the link in the text below the video. It's instant download and prints onto US letter size or A4 paper. It has full-size computer drafted pattern pieces for both sizes, and the video sew-along is included. Find more of my patterns and bag making hardware at spencerogg.com. For regular free bag making tutorials, do subscribe to my YouTube channel while you're on here. And of course, feel free to join my bag making Facebook board for help and support with my patterns and general bag making chat. And of course, to post the photos of your finished projects. I love seeing them. So why not make the bag that gives you a hug, the Amplector? What are you waiting for? Go sew! So we're ready to start on the tutorial for our Amplector pack. Read through the whole pattern before you begin. There's various strap options for you to choose from. So let's have a look at the fabrics that are suitable for this project. For your outer, we want something that has a little body, so anything medium weight. So medium weight fabrics including vinyl, denim, cork, canvas, Cordura, that's a heavyweight Cordura, about 600 denier. Oilskin, it's great particularly for men. Waterproof canvas, I'll be using this today. This is a backed waterproof canvas, I'll tell you a bit more about that afterwards. So as I say, anything that has a bit of body to it, not a quilt weight cotton, that's too light. Something a little more substantial, sort of a canvas weight fabric. Moving on to the lining, just quilt weight for your lining, that's perfect. Something nice and light. And then onto interfacings. We want a fusible interfacing, just a medium to light weight, just to give our fabric a bit of stability. So a fusible, either woven or non-woven, so you can see that's quite a light weight. I'm going to add that to the outer and to the lining. Examples of that are things like Vilene F220, Vilene G700, Pellon SF101. Don't use fleece or foam or anything that's got bulk in it, it's just going to give it too much body. This is quite a slim shaped bag. If you are going to use things like waterproof canvas and cork and vinyl, you don't need interfacing on those outer pieces at all. If you feel you have to use quilt weight cotton for the outer, then you need to add something more substantial to it, like a Decaville Light. But as I say, you're better off using a more heavyweight fabric to start with. So moving on then to our other components and hardware. You're going to need a number 5 bag zip, the length of which is given on the pattern depending on which size of bag you're making. It needs to be 1¼ inches wide. And we'll discuss the reasons for that as we go along. If you can't get it, we can overcome it. It's not a huge problem, but if you can get a 1¼ inches wide, which is the standard width for a continuous zip, then that's great. You'll need some webbing for your straps, or your strap. I'm using cotton webbing. I do prefer cotton webbing to the polyester or the nylon. This one's quite a snazzy one. The polyester and nylon ones tend to be a little bit shiny and often a little bit limp, so that's why I always prefer the cotton webbing. So if you can find it, great, but again, polyester and nylon work fine. So hardware, we're going to need one 1½ inch rectangle ring and one 1½ inch tri-glide, or you can use a 1½ inch side release buckle and tri-glide. I actually prefer the metal hardware for the large version of the bag and the side release buckle for the small version of the bag, but both work with either. And if you're going to make it as just a crossbody with regular crossbody straps, then use the metal hardware, the rectangle ring and tri-glide. You're going to need all-purpose thread to match. I'm using 100% polyester thread as it's stronger than cotton, and you can use optionally your own logo tab or a handmade badge to add to the bag. And then optionally we can also add 2 slim magnetic clasps. I'm not going to add them because I prefer the bag without, because I like to keep the slimline shape of it and I don't feel they're particularly necessary. But you may want them, and in which case I'll tell you where to add them and how to add them during the video. But just use slim magnetic clasps, not the big chunky ones. Small, about 1/2 inch. That's our components. Let's move on to a few additional tips for this pattern. So there's lots of tips in the pattern before you start if you want to read through the written instructions, but there is a few to note. Just nipping back to the fabrics themselves, don't choose an extra firm interfacing. Stick with the given instructions on the interfacings, because it's a bag that is quite soft and it molds around the body, so we don't want to fill it full of Decaville Heavy or something that makes it rigid. If you're using outer fabrics in cork, waterproof canvas, as I discussed, you don't need any interfacing at all on those outer fabrics. Mark all your notches shown on the pattern pieces with a notch or a snip within the seam allowance before you begin. And if you're using continuous zip, as I am, always makes me laugh because I'm forever doing it, zigzag at the top and bottom before you start, just to stop you whizzing that zip off the end halfway through your project. Yes, I do it all the time. So let's get everything printed and cut out. Print off your pattern sheets according to the instructions. If you need any help with opening and printing PDF patterns or sizing them correctly, I've got an instructional video on the channel and I'll add a link in below in the text. Now some of the pieces are cut on fold, and you can either lay the pattern piece on the fold of the fabric to cut it out, as you see I've done here with the lining. So your fold is there, so when you open it out it's twice the size. When I come to a front piece where I maybe want to fussy cut a fabric or something, I'd probably print that pattern piece twice and tape it together so it's easier for me to see a print or make sure something is really accurate. And remember, there's notches on a lot of those pattern pieces, so just put a little snip or a notch within the seam allowance because those are going to be placement marks for later. Pattern piece D is your front pocket. And if you want to use a statement print somewhere or a little bit of quilting cotton with a nice print, that's the place to do it. So just for an example here, this is one with just that pattern piece D, which is a front pocket. So you can fussy cut a nice print and use it on there. I'm making the larger version in the tutorial today, purely because it's easier for you to see. As per the written instructions, I've fused all my pieces apart from my front side panels C. So I've held that fusing back until we get to that point. I'm using waterproof canvas today. I'm finding it's a really nice product. I will put a link in. I mean, I've just bought it from Amazon. I'll put a link into this particular one because I know you'll want to know where I got it from. This is a rubber-backed waterproof canvas. It's very nice to work with. And it's easy to sew, and it works really well in this pattern. And I'm using quilt cotton for the lining. Just to know, I steam all my fabrics well before I cut out, even the waterproof canvas. I'll steam that on a low setting just from the front because everything shrinks a little bit. Even that waterproof canvas I found shrunk a tiny bit, so it's safer to steam everything first, then put your pattern pieces on and cut out. Better safe than sorry. So the seam allowance is 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch throughout the pattern unless otherwise stated. So are you cut out? Let's make a start. First of all, I'm going to grab pattern pieces B and D. So our first operation is to make the front pocket. So my fabric is the waterproof canvas for both pieces. You might have used a statement print for this piece D for your front pocket, that's fine. Make sure you've snipped within the notches, within the seam allowance, just so you can see the placement marks. That'll really help. So take piece D first, and we're going to fold. I've just taken it to the ironing board already, but we're going to fold across those two notches. So you see the two notches on the pattern piece, we're literally folding the fabric at that point, right sides together. So I've pressed that in place. Just as an aside, if you are using a directional print of any kind, the writing on the pattern piece will always indicate the right way that your print should be lying, so the same direction as in the print. So we've folded that back across the notches. The longer side will be the front of the pocket. The shorter side is actually part of the lining of the pocket. So I'll just clip that in place so it doesn't move, and I'm just going to top stitch the top of that pocket now. So I'm going to top stitch across here 1/8 of an inch or 3mm from the edge. I'm using a microtex needle in my machine just simply because it's the waterproof canvas, but it does seem to stitch alright with a regular needle too. Use a needle to suit the fabric you're using. My stitch length is 3 for top stitching here, and I'll shorten it for doing my seams to about 2.7. So back stitch at the beginning and end of every single seam, regardless of whether I say it or not. Take those off now. Trim at every opportunity. It saves you doing lots at the end. If you want to add a badge, add it at this point. I've actually put a placement mark on the front of the pattern. If that helps, you can either cut it out and mark in chalk where it is, or you can just fold it to give you a rough idea where the centre is. Just mark it there. You grab a pen. Use chalk or disappearing pen. Obviously I am using a ballpoint pen just so you can see it. So that's the centre mark for my badge. So I'm going to add a metal handmade badge. You'll have seen these before, no doubt. Just have a prong on the back, so you put that through the fabric and add a backing plate. And then I usually put a little piece of Decaville on as well, just for extra strength. So we'll do that now. Do not use a biro like I'm doing. And that will give you your positioning. I'll just turn that around for a sec so I can see it. So just mark where the prongs are. And I'll do the same on my piece of Decaville. And I'm going to slit the Decaville and the fabric. Put it on there just so you can see it. The Decaville is basically just a little piece of extra strengthener, so nothing pulls out later. So I'll slit my fabric too. You can put a pin across the end so you don't go too far if you're worried about it. Try and keep it in a line. So look, put it on the right way. Now don't push it through too hard. If your slits aren't quite wide enough or quite long enough, go back in and slit them again. If you push, you'll end up pulling a thread from the fabric and you'll end up with a big pull all the way across it. We definitely don't want that. There we go. Flip that over and put my Decaville on top. I just flick it over and make sure it's really straight now, because you can obviously alter it at this point. That's fine. So flip it over, put my backing plate on, and you can either fold them inwards or outwards. If you fold them outwards, there is a little chance of it pulling out sometime in the future, but it's not going to get much wear on this bag. But with it going outwards, it also lies flatter. So fold it inwards, less chance of it pulling out, not that there is much a chance, but it's a lot bulkier. So I tend to just go outwards normally. You can use a pair of scissors or an old metal ruler, but they're quite easy. So that is our badge applied. And now we're ready to put that onto our outer front centre panel. So that is piece D. Grab that, and you've marked on there your 2 notches at the sides. That is where we're going to position this pocket. So take your pocket with a longer side to the front, shorter side to the back, and we're going to position the top stitch edge on those notches on piece B. So you can see they're just there, just lying there. Just clip it in place for a second. If you lift it up, this is your pocket underneath, and they should be lying directly on top of each other, those long edges at the bottom, because I've got a stitch across there to form the bottom of the pocket inside here. Okay, so if you're not quite spot on, you can see mine's slightly slanted. I can just adjust that a tiny bit. So we're all falling in line. Flip it back over. Lift it up. Yeah, nice straight line there. So I'll just clip that in place. And I'm going to stitch along that bottom edge with a 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. If you want to check that your size is correct, you can grab your back panel And you can actually use this back panel A to compare everything all the way along, because this is a solid piece that never changes, and this is the final shape and size of the bag just before we put it together. So you can see if you lay that on there, it's the right height. So let's stitch that across the bottom edge. That's our pocket. So I've turned that back to a stitch length of 2.7. So you can see that has created my inside pocket. So before we go any further, you can install a magnetic clasp on this front pocket if you want to. I've added one on here, so you can see just centrally that will hold your pocket in place. But I do prefer it without. I've got to say, however slim your clasp, you know, it's a really nice figure hugging bag, so I kind of like the slim silhouette, and I don't really think you need it. But if you want to add it, there's no problem. As I say, use a slim one. You can see that is a really nice slim clasp. It's not one of the big chunky ones. So all you need to do if you want to add that is mark your centre point just underneath your pocket here. Add one side of the clasp there and add the other side to the pocket lining through from underneath, and that will position it there for you. So I'll just put my clips back in. I won't add that in today because I do, as I say, prefer it without. All I need to do now is just baste along those two sides just to hold everything in place, so within the seam allowance. On the other side, make sure that pocket's nice and flat before you stitch it. Yeah, just trim up. I spend half my life trimming. And now we're ready to insert our zip. So I'm going to grab a cutting board and mat, lay that on. And I'm going to grab my front lining centre panel G. Yeah, unfold that. So I'm going to lay my lining piece right side down. So my curved edges at the bottom there. I'm going to lay my outer panel right side up. So I've got wrong sides facing. Line them up exactly. And just clip them at the bottom, because we're going to slit across here, so we want it all in the right place, all the way through. Flip it over and check. Okay, nice and flat. So I'm going to slit across the top of the panel through both outer and lining, and this is where I'm going to insert my zip. So grab your quilter's rule so you can make sure it's all lined up nice and squarely. Check your pattern instructions, because it's a different depth down depending on the size of the bag you're doing. And I'm going to slit through both layers here. Be brave, you can do it. Nice clean cut. So now we have two pieces here and two pieces here. So take those off. We're going to call this the upper and the lower centre panel. So we've got an upper centre panel in lining and in outer, and a lower centre panel in lining and in outer. So grab your zip and let's get going. So I'm using a nice quality zip today, but I also use a lot of more economical zips, and you'll notice, just a tip here on the economical zips, they often have taping that waves a little bit, so you can see the difference. Not necessarily the teeth, but look at the tape, it's a little bit flimsier, and it's also a little bit puckered looking. So just to overcome that, take it to the ironing board before you start. We all use a lot of this economical zip tape because it's so much cheaper, and if you're using a lot of it, it makes sense. So just take it to the ironing board and press the tape on either side, and that'll shrink it a little bit so it all lies nicely flat before you start. I've also got a video on the YouTube channel to help you with applying really straight zips as well if you want to take a look at that. I'll put a link in below. So I'm going to put my upper centre panel pieces just to one side for a moment. Move them over here. We'll work on the lower one. So remove the lining, and on the outer, take your zip and lay it face down on top, centering it with the puller to the right when closed. Okay, so my puller is over to the right when the zip is closed and it's face down. We actually want to leave plenty of tape on this side because it means we can take the puller off to the end and we don't have to lift our needle when we're stitching across, so we can shift it over a little bit as long as we've got a bit of tape on that end. So just clip that in place, lining up the top edge. And I'm going to baste across that top edge now, just within the seam allowance. Rather than sandwiching the two and going straight away for it, I like to baste it first and then put the second side on. It makes things so much simpler and it makes sure you get a lovely straight zip insertion. So I'll change to a zipper foot on my machine. And I'll stitch across that top edge within the seam allowance. Then take the lining lower centre panel and lay it right side down directly on top. Line up that top edge. So remember these curved edges on both are to the bottom. We're not attaching the zip to the curved edge, we're attaching it to that top straight edge. And line it up and clip in place again. So just as a quick check, you just have outer and lining with right sides facing, curved edges to the bottom, matching up top and sides, matching up all edges, and your zip sandwich between the two. And your zip is right side down to the outer fabric. Now I'm going to stitch across the whole top zip edge with a 6mm or 1/4 inch seam allowance. So now I'm going to take that to the ironing board and press the panels with the wrong sides together to expose the zip tape and the free edge of the zip. So there we are, a nice pressed front panel. So now we're going to work on the outer upper centre panel. So take those two strips we cut from the top and we're going to work on the outer section. So we're going to lay that face down on top of the zip. If you're using a directional print, make sure it's in the same direction and then flip it down. I'll clip that, lining up the top edge of the zip. So I'll now stitch across that top edge. I'm just going to baste it again within the seam allowance. Just a point of note, if you're using a sticky fabric like this, it's often worth having the zip side on top as you sew. So that's the outer attach. We now want the lining, so flip it over, grab your lining piece, make sure it's the right way around, it's sitting with your print. Is it? I can't tell this way up. Yes it is, right, okay. So flip that right side down, lining up the top edge and clip in place again. And now I'm going to sew across there at my full 6mm or 1/4 inch seam allowance. So that's my zip attached. How easy is that? So I'm going to take that to the ironing board and I'm going to press that upper edge away from the zip again, and then we'll be able to top stitch. So there we are, beautifully pressed. Worth just clipping it top and bottom to make sure your edges are nicely matching. And there's a little check we can do here too to make sure we're at the right size still. Grab that back panel again, your outer back A, lay it down and lay your front panel on top. So this is your completed front centre panel, and just check that you are the same height as that back panel still. Now it might be slightly different, and that may be because you have taken a different seam allowance at your zip. It may be because you didn't use a 1 1/4 inch zip. So if you used a zip that's slightly narrower or slightly wider, that will obviously affect the height of it. But don't worry, it's only going to be a fraction out, and we can sort of work that into the seams because you've got a centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam at the end. So now I'm going to top stitch either side of the zip 1/8 of an inch or 3 mil away from the edge. Hopefully that's looking beautiful. Trim up everywhere. Right, now we're going to move that zip. Don't forget to do this bit. Move it 1/3 of the way open, half the way open. We're going to just baste all the way around our oblong here within the seam allowance so we don't see it afterwards. And remember, we're going to go over the end of the zips here. When you go over this side, just clasp it together so it's grabbing it and keeping it in place. I'm going to change back to my regular foot now rather than a zipper foot to do that. I am using a walking foot here, by the way, but this waterproof canvas is actually quite forgiving with a regular foot too. Okay, so let's baste around the outside. Remember, hold that zip together as you stitch over it. You can always do a back stitch over it too. Make sure your pocket's nice and flat. Trim up. Trimity trim trim. So there we are, that's our zip inserted beautifully and our panel all held together in one. Your zip is on the inside of the panel, not out here somewhere, lost. Now at this point you can trim off your excess zip tape just to match your side seams. I don't, I hang on to them till the very end. So you can reinsert the zip if you ever need to. It's still in one piece and available. So yeah, so trim now or trim later, totally up to you, it won't make any difference to the end product. So now we're ready to add our front side panels. So grab your side panels CX and CY. The CX and CY just because there's one for one side and one for the other. So you've got lining and you've got outer, and you've also got interfacing. So we held on to that interfacing until this point. We haven't fused it yet. So take your interfacing. Because I'm using the waterproof canvas, I'm not interfacing the waterproof canvas, I'm just interfacing the lining. So therefore I've only got 2 pieces of interfacing, but you may have 4 pieces. So I've got my 2 pieces there. I'm going to cut those down by 2 centimetres or 3/4 of an inch along that long edge, so not the curved edge. I'm going to cut 3/4 of an inch off this long edge. The only reason for that is that reduces the number of layers of interfacing by 4 on each side, so it really does make a difference. So take your interfacing and your side panels and fuse those in place. As I say, I'm not fusing my outer, I'm just doing my lining. So I'm going to take those to the ironing board and you're fusing it directly. Let me put it on top of there. So you're fusing it onto the curved, butt it up against the curved edge, and we're leaving this long edge free of interfacing. So let me go and press those in place. So that's my lining interfaced. Just before we attach these, just make sure that you did snip that little notch in the top of the pattern piece. You see there's a tiny little line in the top of there? That's important, so make sure you did snip that just within the seam allowance. Okay. So we'll start with our outer panel, our centre panel that we've just completed. Take your two outer front side panels in outer fabric. Keep your lining fabrics to one side for the moment and lay them out so you can see that the curves are in the right direction. So we want the curves on the outside. So it's all right side up. So once you've ascertained which side the curves go, you can then flip it on top. So this is your outer, just flipping on top. I'm going to line up those long straight edges and clip them in place. Worth making sure that they are parallel. Make sure that zips out of the way. Make sure they're lying parallel to one another, because they're going to open out and it's going to be really noticeable if one is askew. I'm a little bit off at the bottom there. I'm going to flip that over. Grab your lining pieces. This one. And do the same with your lining. Lay it to the side, all the right way up so you can see the curved edges to the outside. And then flip it over so it's right sides together. I'm going to line up against that same edge. Both sides. So then clip it all in place so you've got all those layers together. It's just easier to do it separately. So just a quick check, you've got all your right sides facing each other. So right sides of lining facing lining, right sides of outer facing outer. So now I'm going to take that to the machine and I'm going to stitch a 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance along both sides there. But note at this point, you can either draw it on, but I suggest you use this notch that we added in the top. That is a 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. If you draw it on, it tends to draw it on the outside of your ruler rather than on dead on 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch. So if you're drawing it outside, it makes the seam actually slightly bigger, and because you're doing it across the piece, it'll compound by 4. So my suggestion is definitely to use the notch here at the top, and you're going directly to the point at the bottom, and that will give you your correct seam allowance of 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch. That's one done. Let's do the other side. So there we are. And now we can open those panels and we can press those nice and flat on both sides. So there's my panel nicely pressed open. Now we can do a little check here again with our back piece A, our outer back. Just slip it on top to make sure it's measuring exactly the same. Everything should be lining up just as that back panel. If you do find you've got little bits sticking up at the top or the bottom, you can trim it to fit. It's not a huge deal. And now I'll trim my zips. Now I'm happy. So just fold it back. I'm going to trim my zip. I'm also going to trim a little bit from that top seam as well, just to reduce bulk. Same on the other side. Lift that up, trim my zip. And just trim the corner off the top of the seam allowance. It's the top one more than anything, just to make sure we haven't got too much bulk where we're going to be adding our straps in. So open them up completely, clip them in place at the sides so it's all lying on top of each other. Flip it over to make sure it's all in the right place. And now I can baste those outside edges within the seam allowance just to hold those in place too. And I'm going to top stitch an 1/8 inch or 3mm from the folded edge there too. So that's one side. You can do a double line of stitch in there if you want to. I'll just do the one. Trim, as usual. Okay, make sure that zip is at least halfway open, if not 3/4 of the way open. You don't want to forget that. So we're about halfway through, we're ready to start on our lining next, and therefore I would suggest that this is the perfect spot for a tea break. So, you know, our tea break is an absolute ritual in the middle of a Spencer Ogg pattern. You always need a rest break. It's our time to reflect on what a great job we've been doing so far, and very importantly, if not more importantly, to discuss the biscuit of the month. So yesterday I bought a packet of Jammy Dodgers. I thought they'd look really nice with the colours on my desk and everything. But it appears there isn't a solitary biscuit remaining. You can't leave anything lying around in a house full of hungry boys. So I'm left with a chuffing low-fat biscuit. Oh well, gotta be done. Right, teacups down, it's time to start on our lining. And I've got here our back lining. So I've got E and F, which is my upper back lining and my lower back lining. So I've cut those on the fold, I'll just take those out. So I'm going to lay both of those pieces with the curved edge to the top. Can you see those? I'll try and get those in camera. It's these smaller square sections at the bottom that are going to form our pocket. So once you've got those curved edges at the top, just literally flip them over so they are right sides together and line up that bottom squared off section. And this is what will form your pocket. So line up the bottom and the sides, clip in place. Now we're going to be stitching an L shape around the sides here, and we're going to be leaving the bottom open because that's where we'll turn the bag through at the end. Just as an aside, I'm going to hem this bottom end, or I'm going to turn a hem on this bottom end later on in the pattern, but you do have an option. If you want to press up a hem here now, you can do. I press mine up later because I think it gives it a slightly better effect, but if you want to press it up now and stitch your pocket over it, you can do. As I say, I'm leaving mine till later. So I'm going to stitch upwards from the bottom of the pocket with a 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance in an L shape. So just along that line and out to the edge here. It's important that this little edge here definitely has a 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, because that will change the height of your bag lining. So I'm just going to mark that on so I know at the 1 centimetre mark, not outside it. So I'll stitch that in place. So you can see that L shape there, literally just up the side and along. Same with the other side. Trim. Now flip the panel over so you've got the larger side on the back. Take it to the ironing board and fold the larger side down. So we're folding along that short seam. So you then have your full back lining piece with your pocket inside. So I'll take that to the ironing board and I'll press that in place. So there's my pressed pocket panel. Again, you can compare it with your outer back piece to make sure you're the same size. Perfect. Just keep checking all the way along. You can add a logo tab if you want to. I add it centrally just slightly above the top of the pocket. You can leave the top of the pocket unstitched, or you can top stitch it quite easily. I know it looks hard to do it from there, but just turn it so that you're stitching from the inside and you can move that out of the way. So I'll top stitch the top of that pocket from the inside of the pocket. Yeah, so just open it up, fold one side back a little bit. You don't actually see the ends of the pocket in the finished bag anyway, so don't worry if you can't get right to the ends. So there we are, top stitched. So now, just to strengthen that pocket at the sides, I just want to stitch a box shape on both sides of the pocket open to strengthen the edge of that pocket. So literally just from the edge of the panel to where the pocket opens, across and back down again. You could also use a bar tack just at the end there. So you can see there, hopefully, I've just stitched a little box, small box shape on the corner just for strength. Do the next one. So that's your back lining complete. That was easy enough, wasn't it? Just a note, don't be tempted to put a dividing line of stitching in that pocket because you won't be able to turn it through afterwards. So this is the point I like to press a hem in my pocket at the bottom. So I'm just going to trim the bottom of those seams just to reduce a bit of bulk. I'm going to take it to the ironing board and I'm going to press up a 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch hem on the bottom of that pocket. So we're not stitching it up, I'm just going to press it up because it makes it easier to close later on and make a nice accurate straight line when we close the bag. So I'll do that now. So there's our lining nicely pressed with my hem turned on the bottom of the pocket. I'm not stitching that hem up, that is literally just pressed up to make it easier to close later on. So lay that flat right side up, grab your completed front panel and lay it lining side down on top, matching up all your edges all the way around, and they should match exactly in size. Make sure that zip's open. Clip it in place, and then we're going to baste it all the way around too. So you add a couple of clips, just flip that over to make sure it's all lining up properly. And then I'll take that to machine. I'm going to stitch all the way around within the seam allowance just to baste it in place. So put this to one side and we'll prepare our straps. Today I am making the strap with the rectangle ring and slider. You've also got an option in the pattern, there's full instructions how to make with a side release buckle and slider. So choose whichever you want. I prefer the rectangle ring and slider on the large version of the bag, and I prefer the side release buckle on the small version of the bag. But it's totally up to you, you can use either with either size. If you are making the bum bag though, you do need to use the side release buckle. But there's full photographic instructions for that in the pattern. So we need to cut 2 lengths of your chosen strapping or webbing, a long length and a short length. And the length of those is given in the pattern. The measurement for the straps I've given in the pattern should allow plenty of strap length to adjust to waist height for anybody, but you can increase the longer length of webbing by 6 inches for a taller person, or if you want to wear it high on the chest, then decrease it by 6 inches. And again, the bum bag would probably decrease that by 6 inches, but you do need to check on the person who's going to be wearing it, particularly with the bum bag version. So let's add our hardware. First of all, I'm going to zigzag neaten the ends of each of those pieces of webbing. That isn't just to stop them fraying, it also strengthens those straps inside the bag. If they're not fraying, then they're not likely to pull out of your stitching of the side of the bag either. So let's add our hardware. We can put the short side of the strap away for now. Just put that to one side. We're not going to put that on until a little later, or the hardware on there. So we're going to add our hardware to the long side of the strap. So first we're going to thread on our tri-glide adjuster. So with the right side of the tri-glide adjuster facing upwards and the right side of the webbing facing upwards, I want that blue side upwards, I'm going to thread my adjuster onto it. So up and over the centre bar. I'm going to pull about 2 inches, 5 centimetres through, fold that back and then stitch a box or a couple of lines of zigzag there just to secure it. Now I'm going to thread my rectangle ring onto the free end. Pull it up close to my adjuster buckle. And then pass the free end up through my adjuster buckle again, down the other side. So you see we're forming a loop there. There's no twists within there. And pull most of your webbing through that. So about 2/3 of your webbing. Just get it close to your rectangle ring. Sorry, I'm making a noise. So there we go. You have your rectangle ring threaded on. There's your adjuster. So this will go into one side of the bag and this end will attach to the other end of the webbing at the end. So basically that's your long strap completed and we're ready to move on to attaching it. So we're ready to start attaching our long strap. So we're going to make the L strap configuration today, and this L strap configuration allows the bag to be worn across your left shoulder with the bag sitting on your right hip. If you prefer the bag to sit on your left hip, simply swap left and right positions over. If you want to make it as a bum bag, a clutch or a regular crossbody strap with the straps coming from the top, see the notes in the written instructions for the strap positioning. So it's the L strap we're making here today. So first we're going to attach the long strap. So with the strap with the hardware on that we've just completed, we're going to take the hardware and the strap so it's face down. So just shuffle that along. We want the strap face down. I'm going to drop off my table. And we're going to place the short raw edge of the webbing, i.e. the single loose raw end, along the top edge of the bag and 2.5 centimetres or an inch in from the side edge. So I'm going to use a board, it's easier to see on a board. Position that along the edge of a line. I'm going to go an inch in, 2.5 centimetres, and I'm going to leave a 1/2 inch tail sticking up over the top of the bag there. So make sure it's running parallel to that side edge. Your webbing's falling down away from the top. I'm going to clip that in place. Oh, how did that zip get closed? Leave that open. Keep that zip open. See, I've done that subconsciously. Right, clip that in place and then we're just going to baste that within the seam allowance at the top edge. So that's one strap attached. Now we're going to attach the other side. So line your other edge up along the board and take your remaining shorter piece of webbing. So we haven't got any hardware attached to that. I'm going to lay that right side down and we're going to lay it at an angle. So with the strap length facing upwards across the left corner of the bag, position it 2.5 centimetres or an inch down and 2 inches or 5 centimetres across. So if you want to look in the pattern instructions, it gives you a good diagram there just for positioning. So I'm going to clip that in place. Make sure you leave that 1/2 inch spare webbing across there as well. You don't want to be catching in the bottom right into the seam. And then I'm going to baste that again just on this long outer edge here, not at the top, just to catch it within the seam allowance. And then we're not trimming off the excess webbing here. We're going to leave that in for a little added strength. Now I'll grab my sticky tape and we're just going to tape these straps out of the way a little bit because we don't want to catch them in our seams. So I'm going to fold the short strap out of the way onto the body of the bag. We don't want to catch it in this top seam when we sew. So let's just fold that there so it's well out of our way. We need to be able to catch it within the 1 centimetre or 3/8 inch seam allowance there, but not on the top. So make sure it's angled right for that. That was a weeny bit of tape. Okay, so you can see there, you've still got room to sew your seam allowance there, but it's out of this top edge. And then take the long strap. I'm going to completely get rid of that by passing it through the zip and through the open pocket inside. You see? So if you flip that over, passing it out of there, so that gets the whole bulk of that out of the way. You don't have to worry about sewing around that. But just make sure you've got room to sew along that top seam allowance there. So again, I do like to add a little bit of tape in there just to make sure it's in the right place too. So that's twisted a bit. Just have a little fiddle around with it, but you can see there, if I tape that just across there, plenty of room to get into that seam, but the webbing's well out of the way. And the bulk of it is out of the zip and down the back. There we are. So that's ready to apply our back panel. So I'll place that to one side and we can have a look at our back panel. Okay, finally on to our outer back piece A. Might give that a bit of a press. So just a little bit of inside info on this. I've consciously not added pockets to the outer back because any zip, pull or clasp is going to stick into the side of your body as the bag molds to your side. So it's much better off flat. So adding extra pockets would also add unwanted extra bulk into the side seams. So again, it's a conscious decision not to put anything on the back. But you could go mad and add some interest with stitching. I just added stitch lines. I haven't actually put any wadding in there. It's just literally stitch lines on the back to look like quilting. Or you could add a badge to the back. A smaller version with a badge. But it's just to keep it slim on the back. So let's join our outer front and back. Lay your completed front panel with the outer front and straps visible on top. Make sure all your bits are taped down. Lay your completed front panel with the outer front and straps visible on top. Make sure those tapes are all in the right place. Grab your outer back piece A and we're going to lay this face down on top of the completed front panel. Line up all 4 sides. Last time, it's the last chance, make sure that zip's open. So face down. So right side's facing. Should be exactly the same size now, and we're going to clip that into place. You can see what happens with waterproof canvas, by the way, when it's got a rubber backing. It gets holes in it. However, I did put the seams all in the seam allowance, so it's fine. Start with your corners. Clip everything in place. You've got a little bit of bulk in the middle there because of the straps, but that's fine. We're not going to be sewing over that strap. So you see, you can hold that out of the way as we sew, but we'll get to that. Now what you can do before you put that back panel on is you can draw your seam lines onto it, because as we know, we've talked about all the way along, this piece has remained one solid piece and it's the desired finish shape. So if we draw our lines on, then it's really easy to make sure your top and bottom are going to be parallel and your sides are going to be parallel. You can draw your curves on so you know where to stitch nicely. So there's no reason not to. So keep clipping all the way. Flip it over, make sure everything's nicely in place and you've caught everything. Yeah. A few extra clips. Got a bit of bulk of my webbing in there, but that's fine. So we're looking good. And then I'm going to start stitching along the top edge. So I'm going to stitch all the way around all 4 sides. I'm going to stitch from the back because we know that's the right size and you've probably drawn on your seam allowances. I'm going to start along the top edge, stitch all the way around with my 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Stop halfway, so stitch along the top and the sides, stop halfway and lift that strap out of the way. Make sure as well that that little diagonal section you've got of strap just up here and this side is out of the way. Is it that side? No, it's that side. That little diagonal section is in the correct place as you're sewing over it as well. You can feel it inside. You can always do half and then just check everything and then put the other half back down. But we'll just go straight around it today. You might find a hump jumper helps you to sew over any uneven layers. If you haven't used one before, I've got a video on my channel and I'll add a link in below. Particularly on the small version, if you're sewing with a wide foot, you may find that the hump jumper or a folded layer of fabric helps when you reach the side panels. So let's sew. Remember our little song here, I will not sew over my strap, I will not sew over my strap. So you can lift it up out of the way once you've been over the top. When you come to that corner with that diagonal strap in there, just make sure it's in the right position underneath. I'm going to use my hump jumper there because my strap is pushing my foot up a little. Look at your seams to check they're all straight and that your curves are nice and even. You can do a little extra seamage to correct things anywhere if you need to at this point. I've got a slip stitch there, so I'm going to go back over that, but otherwise that looks alright. For a bit of extra strength, I'm going to do an extra line of stitching just over the top of where the webbing straps are protruding there, just within the seam allowance, so this side. So the moment of truth, we're ready to turn it through, so I'm just going to trim my seams and clip my curves. So clip the curves first before you trim back, it's much easier to snip them at this point. I'm not going to trim away the webbing at all, I'm going to leave as much of that as I can, and I don't need to trim the top edge either because that gives it a little bit of rigidity across that top edge, which is good. And then trim my seam allowances back to half, clip quite a fair bit off the corners and the curves as such. Don't trim any webbing away. Do want to get into that corner though. Okay, so look at the back. And we're ready to turn it through. Did you leave that zip open? I did tell myself 15 times, I did. Okay, so you're turning all the way through. Take your tape off now. Yeah, so use your fingers just to push it out. You don't need any sharp implements for this at all. Fingers are perfectly fine. And see, that's turning out nicely. Okay, so just get that into a nice shape and take it to the ironing board and give it a good press. So there's our bag pressed, looking great. I hope yours is looking really good too. Next step is to close our bag up. So put your hand inside the pocket and just pull that out. And we're just going to clip that closed. You already pressed a hem up there, so it should be nice and neat and straight. Match the edges. And we'll just stitch across there with an 1/8 of an inch 3mm seam allowance, just to close that securely. Push that back inside the bag. So that's our bag closed up. Now we just have to finish the strap. Set that up. So we have our long tail coming out from this side. Bring it around, make sure there's no twist in it. You're going to be wearing it over your shoulder like this. Bring up the short strap and pass the short strap through the front of the rectangle ring. Bend it over, just like we did with the other side. So you've got about a 2-inch tail there inside, and you want that raw edge towards your body. Okay, so just double check there's no twists in the strap, and then we'll do 2 lines of zigzag over there again, close to the edge. Just clip that in place. Trim. There we go. In essence, that is our bag complete. There is another extra touch you can add to that. This was the idea of one of my testers actually. If you don't like particularly to see that zigzag stitching, it is fine actually, you wouldn't really notice it in use, but if you don't want to see it, you can grab a small piece of non-frame fabric such as vinyl or oilskin and wrap that around here, just across the joint, and it does give it a really nice look actually, a really professional finish. Turn it over, and then you can either glue that in place or you can stitch 2 lines of stitching just across the ends here, which is what I'll do, but they will be in a contrast stitch just to save time. As I say, glue works fine too. There we are. That's our bag complete. It's such a useful bag. Go fill it with all your daily essentials, have a dance in it and enjoy it. But don't show it to too many of your friends or they'll all be asking you to make one for them. I hope you enjoyed our tutorial today and you loved the bag that you made. Post your pictures, you know I want to see them, either on my Facebook board or tag on Instagram with hashtag Spencer Ogg Patterns. So why not go try a different fabric, a different size or a different strap configuration? They all give completely different looks. What are you waiting for? Go sew!